Happy Sexy First Fridays. I am just waiting for Sam to request to join. And then once she gets here, we will get started. So we are super excited to talk about type combinations. Okay, here we go. Here is Sam. I'm going to let her in here. I already believe I said go live. All right, is it working? There we go. Yay. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Lyndsey. Happy Sexy First Friday.
This last month went really quick. For me, is what I always say.
It's summer. Everything's crazy. We're both running around, kids home from school, graduations, but we always make time for Sexy First Friday.
That's right, we do. Well, we thought we would just start today with quick intros of who we are again. I know many of you already know who we are, but we may have some new people on today as well. So I will start with the introduction, and then I'll hand it over to Sam to introduce herself. So my name is Lyndsey Fraser. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified sex therapist, an IA accredited professional out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I specialize in relationships and sexuality in a small private practice. And then my Enneagram type is 9 with the wing of 1. I am social dominant, and I have the sexual instinct in the repressed position. So I'll hand it off to Sam to tell you a little bit about herself.
Right. If you don't know us by now, I'm surprised, but I'm Sam E Greenberg. I'm a sexuality researcher by training, and I'm also a sexuality and the Enneagram coach. And my research focuses on sexual desire and Enneagram type, dominant instinct as well, and subtype. And I'm a type 5 with sexual first, then social, and self-preservation repressed.
So today's topic is all about type combinations. This has been the most requested topic that Sam and I both have gotten. And so today what we're going to do, or how I'm going to start this introduction, because one of the most common questions that I get in therapy is there a perfect pairing? Is there a perfect type for who I am that I should be dating or being in relationship? Well, let me tell you, there is no perfect pairing. There is one that is no better or worse than the other. I think that can be surprising because we often think that there should be. What I'm going to say is what makes good relationships in general is that we are confident and comfortable and self-aware of who we are. So understanding the mechanisms of our own type and how that influences how we show it up in relationship with other people in our lives. So it's less about the other, it's more about ourselves. But I will have Sam share a little bit about some common strategies and pairings.
So, I mean, wouldn't it be nice if you could just be told, like, oh, you should date a 4 or a 6 and then you'll have a good relationship? That's what people always want to know. But like Lyndsey said, there's no good or bad pairings, and it has much more to do with the health and level of development and integration of the individuals than it does about the type of whether it will work or not. So one thing I wanted to say is while there are no good or bad pairings, what we do see is that there's more comfortable pairings and more challenging pairings. On its face, you might think like, oh, I'll go for the more comfortable pairings, but that's actually, comfortable isn't necessarily good, and it's not necessarily a lasting relationship. So an example of this is if you have a withdrawn type, which is 4, 5, and 9. Those are the types that move away in conflict. They kind of withdraw. If you have double withdrawn relationship, that can feel comfortable because when you have conflict, you're both responding in the same way. However, that doesn't necessarily make for a great relationship in every case, because if you have double withdrawing, okay, they're responding this way, I'm responding the same way, but now there's nothing bringing us together and there's nothing making us address the conflict. So even though it's comfortable, it might not be healthy, or it can be. And then conversely, there's definitely pairings that are less comfortable, which would be, for example, an assertive type with a withdrawn type, because with that you can get like a cat and mouse dynamic where the withdrawing partner is withdrawing and the assertive partner is like chasing them with assertiveness. That feels really hard and bad to both. However, that doesn't mean it's bad, because you do have one partner that's pushing to confrontation and one partner that's more retreating and circumspect, and that can be balancing. So no good type combinations, no bad type combinations. They're all basically neutral and they can all be good or bad. But yes, there's going to be people that you feel more comfortable with at first because they're more similar to you. That doesn't mean you should or shouldn't be with those people. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense, Sam. I think it's really interesting because, you know, you talked about the double withdrawal, which is my relationship. Well, and it's our dynamic
Yes.
too as well. But it's that you can be really comfortable sort of doing your own thing, and we'll talk more in detail, but it's like it actually takes work to connect. And then, you know, even when you're talking about like even two assertive types, it might get really loud and conflictual and energetic, but at the same time, two assertive types, you know what the issue is. With two withdrawal types, you may or may not know what the issue is.
So when we get to talking about 9 and 5, but it's like, are their pairings common? And I'll say like the research perspective on this, which is that we don't know from a research perspective. There hasn't been any like empirically sound research done saying which type pairings are the most common, although that would be easy to do. Maybe I can do it in the distant future when I have free time. There's been some informal surveys and stuff, so we have a little bit of an idea, but in general, the research doesn't say. But from a clinical anecdotal perspective, there are, and I'll let Lyndsey speak to that.
Yes, I was going to talk a little bit about some of the common pairings that I see in my therapy office. I also want to keep in mind that as I share this, this is based on the clinical work that I have been doing the last 10 years in my practice. I do attract certain types more often than not in my practice, in particular withdrawal types. Imagine that as a withdrawal type myself. And so I will just talk a little bit about some of the common pairings that I see come in kind of over and over again, knowing that this is my practice in particular. So 2 and 5 is a really common pairing that I will see. More often than not, it's a woman that's a 2 and then a male that's a 5, or a man that's a 5. 1 and 7 doesn't tend to run on gender lines. I might see it could be male or female or same-sex combination couples that come in. This is just a very common one that I see in general, and also a very challenging but exciting combination as well. 2 and 6 are also quite common that I might see come into my office. 9 and 1. In this one in particular, more often than not, I'm going to see where the man is the 9 and the woman is the 1. 9 and 6 kind of can go both ways, though more often than not, I might see a woman that's a 9 with a man that's a 6. But I do also see quite a few same-sex couples in the 9-6 dynamic, women that are in relationship together or men that are in relationship together. So this is a really common one overall, despite gender or sex that you choose to be in relationship with. 9 and 8. Again, this is where the men are typically 9s, the women are typically the 8s. 9 and 5, this is where my type, where the women are the 9s and the men are the 5s. And then 8 and 2, again, this one, more often than not, it's a male that's an 8 with a woman that's a 2, but I have seen it the other way. And then 2 and 3 and 3 and 4. And I probably am missing some that I see as well. Oh, 5 and 6. is one I see too quite a bit. So there are some common pairings that I see more often than not, or types that are more attracted to each other. But that's what I have been seeing in my office. And then we are going to now move into talking type combinations.
So the reason we haven't previously addressed this, even though we get so many requests for it, is because obviously there's so many type combinations that we cannot cover them all, like even close to covering them all in one half-hour session. But we have our trusty picking stuff from a hat thing happening again. So we're going to cover as many as we can. And then if you guys are interested in a second part where we cover more, just let us know. But the first thing we were going to do, because we got the most requests for talking about 9 and 5 and 8 and 5, which happens to be our two relationships, and then 9 and 5 is also our Lyndsey and my dynamic. So I'll have Lyndsey, you go ahead and start with a little bit about 9 and 5.
Yeah, I think, so one of the things that I was mentioning with the 9-5 dynamic, and my husband is a 5 who has self-preservation in the first position, is that sort of double withdrawal, right? Having two withdrawal types. So my husband and I think this is pretty common with the 9-5 dynamic as well, is like you can get really good at doing your own thing, that sometimes you have to be much more intentional about talking. There's also some beauty on that. Like one of the things that I will often share about our own relationship is like, it is not uncommon for us to both be in the same room, reading our own books, feeling connected, having that quiet, and sort of having that closeness. And when I mention this to other people, they're like, what? You both sit there and like are not talking to each other and like enjoy this? I'm like, we love it. So there's that benefit of it, but there's also that like you can get so used to kind of doing your own thing that you don't do a good job of connecting. One of the things that we have done in particular is like we intentionally do walks at night. Where it's like we will just go for a walk around the block, just the two of us, to make sure that we are sort of having that organic, intentional connection. And I think I've mentioned this one before, but this is a good thing for, I would say, all couples to have like this 10 minutes of connection. Another aspect is we struggle with empathy sometimes. My husband having a lack of it. That he can, this is one of our constant conflicts. He's also very private, and so like then, you know, like so I'm like, oh my God, now I'm sharing something about him, which is another aspect of fives in particular. But like one of the constant conflicts we have is that ability to understand sort of the other person's perspective around empathy and not getting stuck in like data or analytics or the facts of what actually happened or occurred. What things would you add from the dynamic of 9 and 5?
Well, there's probably a lot. We get to spend a whole session on this, but let's just add in the sexual element because it's Sexy First Friday. So I don't want to put you on the spot about your relationship. So I'll say a little bit about this. So with the 9 and 5s, their sexual dynamic, you can get like a lack of initiating, like, because both are very self-contained. And yes, 9s merge, but they are in general pretty self-contained. Like, who's initiating sex? Like, neither of us might be, you know? So there's that. And sometimes you get with 9s and 5s, like someone has to take on the role of being the more assertive partner, even though neither wants to. And that would apply to sex. That would apply to we're having an argument and someone has to take the higher ground and say, like, we need to discuss this. So I often see that that's 5s, but then it can also be 9s. And then you can get some resentment from whichever partner it is because neither wants to do it. So it would be better to sort of like split that like mental load.
I'm going to say you're accurate, Sam, without sharing too much information.
Okay, so because we're going to try to get through a bunch, we're going to do like the speed round on all the ones we choose from the hat, but I'll talk about 5-8 quickly. So 5-8 is actually quite a common pairing from my experience. And The reason is, well, I think the reason is that 5s grow to 8 when they're healthy. So 8 can be like a role model for 5s. And if anyone has met a 5 that's done tons and tons of self-work, they present more like an 8. Although not all the way, you know. So with 5-8, you get like the 8 over time, the 8 softens a lot, and the 5 gets a lot more confident, more talkative, and more 8-like. So you sort of see like a meeting in the middle. And then with the sexuality, I would say it's like very in the body for 8s. So that can be good for 5s because it keeps it in the body. Like 5s are really prone to like this wandering fantasy sexual life, and 8s don't understand that. That's just not who they are. So 8s are like, what are you doing up there in your head? Like, sex is right here in the body. Like, come down here, get in your body. That can be really healthy and really helpful for 5s. You know, I think, yeah, really embodied sexuality, I think, you know, often quite like a robust sexuality, because 8s are lustful. You know, 8s report having a high sexual desire. And then the last thing I'll say is that, at least from the 8's perspective, the 5 can be like all in or all out. So it's like sometimes the 5 is like 100% present. This applies to sex and regular relationship stuff. 100% all in, and then sometimes they're like gone. Like 5 is gone in my own little world, doing my own projects. Like, I don't even know you exist, basically. So that can be a little bit challenging for the 8, like, to predict when the 5 is present or not present. Do you have anything to add, Lyndsey?
You know, actually, I have not seen a 5 or 8 couple in my office, so I wouldn't know what to add to this one in particular. So I'm glad that it's your relationship dynamic.
Yeah, and I've met quite a few 5-8 couples as well, so I think it's kind of an interesting pairing. So, okay, we're gonna go fast because we want to try to get through a bunch. So, gonna choose one at random, and whichever one of us has more experience working with the pairing that we pick, will probably cover it. So 1-8. Lyndsey, I think that might be one for you. A 1-8 dynamic. What's that like?
So one of the things that I will see around the sexuality component for 1-8 in particular is that, so 8s tend to like more intense touch, more firm touch, more spontaneous touch in general. And for 1s, that can be a lot. So for the 1, there's like an appropriate place to touch me or not touch me. They also have a lot of sensitivity in their body. And so it can be really hard for 8s in particular to understand like what is the right softness of touch per se. And so like it's kind of finding that perfect kind of touch, and that can be frustrating for the 8 to be in relationship and very overwhelming for the 1s in particular. And so like what I will see is that because typically what I will see with 1s in my practice is a whole lot of rigidity in their body. So there's a lot of like stiffness, even though they hold their body. And so their bodies sometimes can actually hurt, or touch doesn't feel good. And so it can be it's kind of like very particular in finding the right kind of touch. And the 8s don't get that. Like, why wouldn't you want this intensity? Why can't I smack your butt when you're cooking dinner? Because it's not the appropriate place to be smacking my butt while I'm making dinner. and so there's this appropriateness of like when it's okay or not okay. It's not uncommon for 1s to sort of have like there's a right and a wrong place for sexuality and touch to be happening. Again, this would also depend sort of on the instinctual stacking for 1s. But that's one thing that I will see in particular is just the kind of touch and just even the kind of sexual behaviors that are okay or not okay for the relationship dynamic. And so a lot of times, just like a quick little what would you do in this scenario is I will oftentimes, again, I'm going to bring up my little sexuality book again, but it's talking about like getting a sexuality book to talk about sort of like what works or what doesn't work within the relationship, and then also sort of that ability to talk about body sensations, emotions, and thoughts. One of my favorite things is hand massage. Give somebody your hand and you can play around with the intensity of touch, and so then the person can say that feels good, that doesn't feel good. And so that's one of the things that I will see with 1 and 8. So hand massage is a good way to figure out what kind of touch feels good or not.
Okay, let's move on right away. It's like speed dating.
We got
a comment that says, I presume subtype affects the color and intensity of these patterns. Like, absolutely. Our most recent Sexy First Friday before this one was all about subtype, so you can take a look at that. But going into the nuance of all these things combined is so, complex. So we're just talking about type today, but yes, that is definitely true. Okay, so I picked another one. Okay, 4-5. I feel like I can speak to that. So the 4-5 relationship is quite whimsical. It has like a quality of whimsy or like a fantasticalness, I don't know if that's a word, to it, because we have both types with this like incredibly rich interior life. So there's a lot of whimsy, there's a lot of like shared internal sharing of my internal experience, that kind of thing. It's usually a lot of humor. I've seen like a lot of laughter in these pairings. And then sexually, I think it goes really into fantasy because you have 5s, head type, head centered, like intellectual sexual fantasy. Then you have 4s, heart type, emotionally fantasizing. Both are huge on fantasy. So sexually with a 4-5, you can see like a lot of role play, a lot of fantasizing, a lot of like creation of their own world together, like sexually and otherwise. Should we move right along? Okay, here we go. All right. Okay, hold on, they're getting tangled. Okay, 3-4. Lyndsey, do you have much to say about 3-4?
Yeah, I can talk about this one in particular. So sometimes what I see is the pace of the 3 is much more quick than the pace of the 4. And so there can be sometimes the desire sort of for the 4 to move more quickly, or can you get out of that emotional experience? I'm thinking of a couple that I have in particular, like when he has sort of these, he's the 4, she's the 3, like when he has sort of these down melancholic type of experiences, or like he's outside admiring the new grass that they just planted, and like he could stand out there and admire it for a while. And she's like, what are you doing? Like, you're wasting time. Like, let's get moving, let's get going, And so I think around the sexuality dynamic is there can be sometimes, of course the 3s, because they're attachment types, are going to kind of look to the 4s of like, what do I need to do to be impressive? But there can also be like, I don't necessarily want the long drawn out sexual experience. Sometimes that can happen sort of within that dynamic as well. And so there can be sort of this push-pull around emotionality and like, when's expression okay and when it's not okay, because the 3s, like, they feel deeply as well, but there's also sort of a detachment from the emotions. And so that can feel sometimes cold to the 4 in some ways, right? Like, why can't you sit in and be okay with, like, where am I at? Like, why do you want to hurry me out of the emotional experience that I have? So that's a little bit about that typing combination.
I forgot to say, everything we put in the hat is requests that we got. We didn't put every single type combination that exists. We just did the ones that we got asked to do, which was actually a lot of them. But so these are all your all's requests. So I'm going to choose another one. Okay, 2-5. I'll say one word about this, and then I think, Lyndsey, you work with them a little bit more than I have. But something I have seen in 2-5s is that the relationship comes to revolve around the 5 in a certain way, to where the 2's accommodating sexually, like the frequency and the preferences of the 5, because 2's do tend to accommodate, but then we can see like resentment building and things like that. But Lyndsey, you know more about this than me.
Yes, definitely. Because in general, a lot of my 5s, especially if they're self-preservation or social, sexual 5s are going to look a little bit different, tend to maybe desire sex, or relational sex, I should clarify, which we talked about last time, a little bit less. And because 2s can sometimes use sex as the mechanism to affirm that they are loved, there can be this sort of wrapped in around this, like, do you love me? Do you not love me? We're not having sex enough from the twos perspective. And then I have seen with some of the twos in my office, like sort of that 8 coming out where they get angry and frustrated and are yelling and threatening to leave the relationship in all of these things because they're not feeling loved, and 5s have a little bit more difficulty verbally expressing or showing love, and the 2s really want that affirmation that they're going to be loved. And then you have 2 rejection types, which I think we do need to do a part 2, Sam, because I feel
part 4.
Part 4, because I could go a lot more into depth in this particular dynamic, because I think there's a lot of different pieces kind of coming into play. But yes, it tends to be, it's hard for the 2 to know that the 5 loves them, and then they get frustrated. But you're right, they're going to follow the 5 for like what's going to happen sexually, because they oftentimes 2s don't know what they like a lot of times. And they are looking to sort of please the partner around sexuality. And sometimes the 5 can't voice it, so then you get lost. Like, what do we do sexually?
Yeah. Okay, let's see if we can get maybe 2 more in. And okay, great. This is perfect because I want to say something about 9s. I just chose 9-4. 9s also can have a lot of trouble knowing what they like sexually, but it's a little bit of a different flavor than with the 2s. So with 9-4, like 4s can get frustrated because the 9s sexuality feels like so ephemeral or amorphous, and they like 4s, like I said, are big into fantasy, so they want to be like, what do you like? What do you dream about? What's your fantasy? I'll make it happen. And the 9s really aren't that into that, their body type. So 4s can get frustrated and kind of like confused. Lyndsey, do you have anything to add about that?
I think relationally, one of the beautiful things about a 9-4 dynamic is that the 9 can actually sit in that emotionality with the 4 in ways that other types cannot. At the same time, the 9 can get overwhelmed by that emotionality, but I have found that the 4 feels like I can be more of myself within this relationship, and it's okay, and like you're okay with the deep dive into wanting to understand the self and that kind of sitting in those darker emotions and things like that. And so it's a really interesting dynamic in that sense. But yes, because 4s have a lot of fantasy around sexuality and often know what they want, and the 9's like, I have no clue, you tell me and I'll do it. I'll accommodate you. so that there can be some frustrations in the sexuality, but there's a really strong relational emotionality compatibility for that particular pairing.
Okay, let's do like a 30-second one more, and then we want to save time for telling about our surprise. Okay, 1-7. Lyndsey, take it away.
So this is one of the combinations that I see extremely frequently, and I believe I've actually even talked about it before on some of these First Sexy Fridays. It is that kind of the opposites attract. So you have the 1 who likes things structured and organization, has this kind of firm idea of what's right and wrong, and then you have the 7 who wants freedom and spontaneity, and is kind of going from thing to thing. But what I find is they balance each other out really well, because they're, you've got the growth point on each end for the other one. But also the things that attract them to each other are the biggest complaints that they have. And so I think we talked before around sexuality for 1-7 in particular, is that 7's like spontaneous. Sex is about play. It's about having fun. And it can be hard for a 1 to get into that space of sexuality. And so I will mention again, which I know I've mentioned before, but it's the planned spontaneity around sexuality that is huge. Because when that's planned for the 1, they can go to the 7, and the 7 then gets the freedom that they want of the spontaneous experience happening versus a planned sexual experience.
Okay, we're all the way at the end already, and we only covered maybe like 8 combinations. So let us know if you want to see part 2 in July. And the last thing we wanted to share is we have a surprise for July. Lyndsey, you want to say what the surprise is?
Yes. both Sam and I are going to the IA conference in San Francisco because we're part of a panel where we're going to be talking about it's Enneagram After Dark. And if you're there, hopefully you can join us. But we're going to do a Sexy First Friday day, or part 2, or whatever you want to call it, when we're in San Francisco, where we're together, and you can see us both on the same screen when we are there. And it will be, I think it's the 3rd Friday in July. Is that correct, Sam?
Yes, third Friday. So we're doing Sexy First Friday in our regular format, and we're doing surprise additional Sexy Third Friday, and we'll be together. So we're super excited. We do have a list of topics that we can cover that people have suggested and that we've thought of. But if you have a special idea for our in-person edition, message us. If you want to see second type combination episode, message us and we'll see what we can do. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. And we are happy to do part 2 because I feel like, oh my goodness, I don't think we got to half of our requests.
So we'll more soon.
All right.
Bye, Lynn.
Bye, Sam. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great Friday.